What's up, everybody? Welcome into Hawk Talk on Melrose. I am Collin. Thank you for tuning in. What I am going to do today is talk Iowa wide receivers, as this has been a position group that has been so bad for so long. And the time is now for it to take that next step and for it to essentially soar in year two under Tim Lester. And the big question is, can it? And that is what we're going to explore today. So let's begin. And what I'm about ready to say, I might look like a complete dumbass here in about 5 months. But I'm going to start off this episode saying that I'm somewhat, now remember that word, somewhat confident in this wide receiver room. I just think that they are going to take that next step this year. Now, how big of a step? That's going to be the biggest question because we've been so bad for so long, and we'll get into some of the statistics here in a little bit. So, what does success look like? We'll get into that, but I really do feel confident in this group. There is a little bit of like a cautious optimism with me because it is one of those things where it's like, we got to wait to see it to believe it. Because when you look at this room, I think there's like 4 different question marks that you can kind of point to. Number one, who is that consistent star, right? We're talented from top to bottom. There's guys that are capable, but who's that consistent number one star for us? Because that's something that we have lacked for a really long time. And then to kind of go along with that, we have very limited proven production in that room. I mean, Reese Vanderzee, for example, right? Looked good in the first game, but then he kind of looked like a freshman the rest of the year. And so, what do we have out of him? Seth Anderson's been hurt for, so long. It seems like when he's out there, he plays one game and then he's hurt again and he's kind of up and down. Jerry Bowie, has a good game and then you don't really see him for a couple games. Dane Howard had that good game against Washington and then really that was it. So very limited proven production. And then you could say the chemistry between Mark and the wide receivers, right? Mark was out all of spring. And so now we're relying on all of summer and fall camp, which isn't that long of a time to kind of build that rapport, build that chemistry between Mark and the wide receivers. And then this might be the biggest reason is we have to realize who we are facing, some of these defenses, some of these secondaries, these corners that we will be facing this season, right? Oregon, Penn State, teams like that have some really good secondaries. And so do we have faith that our wide receivers are going to get open and create separation? And then when they do, or if they do, are they going to be able to catch the ball? Because that's something that we have been burned a lot recently is guys dropping balls. So those are all things that, yes, 100% big question marks and something to monitor. But let's get into why I'm cautiously optimistic about this room and why I'm confident that they can take that, I don't know if you want to use the word giant leap, but at least a leap forward this year. And so the way I look at it is, okay, we are now in year 2 under Lester. And let's face it, in year 1, we're implementing a whole new system where not just the players are learning a new system, but the coaches are as well. And Lester talked about it a lot going in last year. And I think maybe we tended to overlook it because we were so excited, finally a new offense. But the passing game is going to be the last thing that's going to essentially get good at, right? Because it takes a lot of time. It's all about timing. And so, we went into last year kind of knowing in a way that, yeah, we're probably not going to look great in the passing game. And maybe a lot of that has to do with, obviously, yeah, learning a new system, but then also who our quarterback is. Like, let's face it, Cade McNamara clearly was a shell of himself after all those injuries. And then you had Brendan Sullivan, who was more of a runner than a passer. I mean, I like Brendan, but that's just the reality of the situation. And so now you get into year 2 and you believe in what you have in Mark, right? We saw what he did at South Dakota State. Now, yes, level up in competition, but if he is as good as he was at South Dakota State, then we're in good hands with at least a pretty competent quarterback. Something that we have not had since Nate Stanley, right? 2019 was the last time we had a competent quarterback. You have that. You have Lester, right? This is a huge priority for Lester going into this year. There's a reason why he goes out and gets Warren Ruggiero, the Wake Forest offensive coordinator. We could spend an entire episode talking about his accomplishments at Wake Forest. And let's face it, that's not a dominant program in the ACC, yet they were dominating on the offensive side of the ball some of those years. So huge pickup there. And getting someone like that, that they're trying to get this figured out and fixed, right? And then, what I just talked about, like there's no breakout player, no consistent number one star, but man, I really, really like this group, right? We have a very talented group. I like how you can somewhat say you feel good about 8 guys. I mean, when was the last time we could say that? We have a mix of guys that are tall and lengthy that kind of fit that X position that we desperately needed all these years. We have several guys that have quickness and speed. And I think the biggest critique I'm going to get maybe on this episode is maybe using an example like this. Like, all right, Collin, let's say you are a Michigan State fan and you guys play Iowa next week. Are you going to be nervous about the wideouts for Iowa as a Michigan State fan? And I'm going to be completely honest with you. Probably not, right? Because when you associate Iowa wide receivers and being good or really good, they don't go hand in hand. And so, no, I'm probably not going to be nervous. But that doesn't mean that Iowa doesn't have a group of guys that are talented, that are capable. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, right? Once again, there is no consistent breakout number one player as of now, right? We're only in May. We don't know come September, October. But just because I say that doesn't mean that we don't got guys that have what it takes to be pretty good. Now, how good? I don't know, but be decent. And then I think this is maybe the last thing, and I get this. You're probably going to be like, oh my gosh, you're really going to rely on what people say in the spring. But there's been a lot of optimism this spring with the wideouts. You've heard from numerous sources, right, that they just look way better out there. Now, you take that with a grain of salt. I did go to the spring game, and I know it was only one day, one game, one practice, whatever you want to say. But I walked out of Kinnick being like, yeah, that room does look pretty good. These guys, like Reese Vanderzee, Dane Howard, they look bigger. They look stronger. You have some quickness. And this was without Sam Phillips, the transfer, and without Jacob Gill. So once again, what does success look like? Because it has been so bad for so long. And so I'm going to share the last how many years and the statistics involved with this wideout room. I mean, you go back to last year, year one under Lester, and I'm not going to critique Lester here, implementing a new system, not having great quarterbacks, but not good. I mean, the only good thing about last year was Jacob Gill, who was a wide receiver, led the team in receptions. The last few years before that was always tight ends, finished with 411 yards. And I kind of separate it between total receiving yards and then just the wideouts. And as you can see here, we had under 1,000 yards receiving by our wide receivers, and we only had 7 total touchdowns by our wide receivers. So not very good. In 2023, it was really bad. I still can't believe that Eric All got hurt the 6th or 7th game of the season and still led the team in receiving yards with 299. We only had 754 total wide receiver receiving yards that year and only 3 touchdowns by our wide receivers. 2022 really wasn't much better. We only had 796 receiving yards by our wideouts and only 2 touchdowns by our wideouts. I mean, that is not good. If you're a wide receiver, do you want to come to Iowa looking at those stats? I don't think so. And then 2021 was the best year out of the last 4 years, and it still wasn't that good. Only 1,344 total yards by our wideouts and only 8 total touchdowns by our wide receivers. And, the big thing with 2024, 2023, 22, and 2021 was no wide receiver was above 500 yards. I mean, the closest was Jacob Gill with 411. So, once again, if you're a wide receiver, why would you want to come to Iowa? When you look at that, why would you want to come to Iowa? And you go back to last year, we had that one guy from Missouri State, I think it was Missouri State, who it was kind of down to Iowa, North Texas, and Fresno State. He wasn't from California, so he had really no ties with Fresno State, but he chose Fresno State over Iowa after he visited Iowa. I mean, that shouldn't happen. I know you're going to lose the recruits, things just happen, but a Big Ten school, when you got him for a visit and he was at Iowa for an official visit for 1 or 2 days, you should not lose to Fresno State. But why did we lose to Fresno State? Is because you just look at the track record. Not good. And so what does success look like? I think for me, go back to 2019. Our top 4 leading receivers that year were not tight ends. They were all four wide receivers were our top receivers in 2019. And not only that, but we had two guys over 500 yards. Emir Smith-Marset had 722 yards. Tyrone Tracy had 589 yards. Nico Raganini had 439. And Brandon Smith also had 439 yards. We had over 2,200 yards by our wide receivers alone. And this was 6 years ago. I mean, this wasn't pre-Brian Ferentz. So this was during Brian Ferentz's era. But why were we at least decent was because we had a competent quarterback, A, and B, we had some good wide receivers. And you look at that year, Emir Smith-Marset, Tyrone Tracy, Brandon Smith, Nico Raganini. Did we have just a superstar wide receiver that year? No, not really. We just had a group that was pretty talented, and we had a group that, some guys did different things. Like Tyrone Tracy, Emir Smith-Marset was kind of the quick speed type player. Brandon Smith was more of the possession player that can catch that one-on-one, stretch the field a little bit. You just had guys that could do different things. And so for me, that's kind of what I look at this year with this group, right? Is there that star, that number one? Probably not. But from top to bottom, you got a lot of talented dudes in there that I think will be able to compete. So for me, 2019, if you kind of compare it, that's kind of what I think success would look like, right? Have multiple wideouts with maybe 500 plus yards receiving this next year. Make it a priority to feed them the ball. Maybe finish with 15 plus touchdowns by our wideouts. Have more passing plays with 30 plus yards. Things like that. I think if you can do that, and that's like to me, I don't really feel like that's asking for much. I think that's just getting back to being like what you probably should be at minimum every single year, right? Where you're not a joke of a team. Because, go back to last year, we still finished 129th in the country. We only averaged like 131 yards a game passing. We were just ahead of Michigan, who was like us in 2023, did not have a quarterback. And then we were just above the Service Academy. So it was not good. It was still not good in year one under Lester. And so it is so important, right, to get this figured out, because truth be told, if you haven't known already, but we don't play in divisions anymore. We don't play in the Big Ten West. And it is so important that we figure out our passing game, because you are not going to beat a lot of the good teams. I mean, we've seen in our own eyes, whenever we played good teams the last 4 or 5 years, we get blown out. It's because you can't really just rely on special teams and defense against those teams. No, you got to be able to throw the football. You got to make it a little 21st century. And we need to start showing high school recruits, portal players that, hey, Iowa's not a place that you will forfeit your career because you're not getting fed the ball. No, you're going to come here and you're going to flourish. And then if you start actually having a track record of what we're accomplishing, then you can start showing them like, hey, look at what it was, look at what it is now, and you can be part of that. And I just feel like if you start doing that, you're going to be able to get better players more easily. All right, as I wrap up this episode, I just kind of want to look at the room a little bit as we kind of wrap it up and talk a little bit more about this room. So I think it starts at the top with Reed Vanderzee. I'm all in on this guy. You saw last year, that first game against Illinois State, 5 catches, 66 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then, he battled an injury. He kind of looked like a freshman the rest of the year, but he added about 10 to 15 pounds this offseason. He definitely looked the part at the spring game. And I think he's a guy that, once again, when you're talking stretching the field, that X player that we desperately needed these last how many years, I think he's a guy for us at 6'4". Jacob Gill, he led the team in receptions last year. To me, he's like Mr. Reliable for us. Just a very, very reliable player. Catches a lot of hard balls and just a decent possession wide receiver. Seth Anderson, to me, it's like if he can stay healthy, I think he can flourish. We just haven't really seen the full potential in Seth because he hasn't been healthy enough. Feels like every year he gets hurt and he's out for extended period of time. Dane Howard, he's another guy like Reese Vanderzee who looks like he's added some pounds to his frame. He's 6'4", so he's tall, but like last year or the year prior, it just wasn't very big. And so it looked like, I don't know how much he added, but just being at the spring game in person, he definitely looked bigger. Hayden Weegan, he was promised a bigger role this year. And I guess I saw that in the spring game. I mean, he was kind of all over the field, jet motions, speed outs, drag routes. He just has quickness and speed that is hard to stop. And then Sam Phillips, I think he was a great transfer portal player that we got in the winter. He's from Chattanooga, had 803 yards and 3 touchdowns this past year. And I think the most impactful stat is he had 0 drops on 78 targets this past year. It's pretty damn good. Jarrett Bowie, I think he's kind of like Jacob Gill to me, kind of a possession wide receiver. He was hurt pretty much all of spring, so didn't really get a chance to see him during the spring game and haven't really heard much about him. I'm sure maybe he's a little buried on the depth chart now because of the injury. He had a decent bowl game, had 3 receptions for 30 yards, actually led the team in yards. So, just another guy that been at Iowa for a few years now, you can maybe rely on him. And then last, KJ Parker. I think he is a guy that has the utmost potential, and I think he is going to see the field a lot this year. He was one that I was very high on going into his college career. He had a fantastic high school career, had over 1,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, and averaged 30 yards per catch his junior year of high school. And there was one source that said he might be the most polished wide receiver Iowa has landed in the last 10 years. And so he has lateral quickness. He has speed. He has the ability to make plays out of nothing. You saw in the spring game, he had some nice catches. We started hearing rumblings during bowl prep that, this is a dude that is going to be pretty good for us. And so I'm really, really high on him. And so you think about what I just talked about, all those guys, right? From top to bottom, KJ Parker, I just finished off. All the guys ahead of him that, yes, very limited proven production, but I like what we have in this guy. I like what we have in that guy. And so that is kind of where I'm getting, where I am talking about where I feel good about this room and why I feel like it will take that next step this next year. It's obviously a wait and see game. And that's why I started off this episode saying I might look like a complete dumbass, right? Because I am fully on board. I really do think they have the potential and they have what it takes to essentially soar in year 2 under Lester in 2025. But obviously it's a wait and see game. And so we will end it there. Let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know if you're like, no, I do not. I don't trust this group, or I don't think it's going to happen, Collin. You're dumb. Or, we'll see. I mean, because I'm sure there's going to be different angles to this. There's going to be some that agree. There are going to be some that don't. There's going to be some in the middle. But that's what's the fun about the off season, is because, you truly do not know until you get out there on August 30th and actually see them out there competing against, other competition. So that will do it for this episode. Thank you guys all for listening, and go Hawks.